Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Video Mail for the week of November 7th, 2011. Welcome to the site. To the new members, welcome back to the old. The Ask Video Mail is your chance to get your question, character, animation, or performance answered in a video just like this one, but don't forget, I need your question if I'm going to answer it. So please send your Ask Video Mail question to webmaster@kennyroy.com. I read all the questions and I answer the ones that I think will help the most people. And starting probably next week, we'll see. I'm going to take down the poll. I've taken into consideration everything you've said in the poll where I asked if you'd like to vote on future Ask Video Mail questions. I'm excited about that. It seems like you all want to participate a little bit more. But I need more Ask Video Mail questions because if we're going to be polling them, then I need to have like a backlog of them so I can pit them together and show them to you. So send more Ask Video Mail questions if you're one of the people that wants to vote on Ask Video Mail questions for sure. I'm really happy that you all participated and thank you for giving your opinion in that poll. And we're just going to move on together and kick a little bit of butt. This Ask Video Mail is interesting because I wanted to pull something from an outside source. I was cruising around the 11 Second Club forums and someone asked if they, or how a person would go about animating a sword coming out of a sheath. So obviously this is something that is definitely well within the realm of something a character animator would need to know, especially in the commercial or TV, like episodic animation industry. And so I wanted to show you if you didn't know how to rig up a sword. So I've showed you how to correctly rig a prop before, but this is just a little bit more complex. Not too much more complex, but it's just a little bit more complex, so I thought I'd go through it with you. I will give you this sword rig, and what you can do with this sword rig is it's fully scalable. So what you'll do is you'll scale the rig to match your sword and your sheath, basically just the position of your sword and your sheath. And then what you'll have is a rig. Then you can drop your geometry into the correct groups and excuse me, and boom, from that second onward, you'll be able to use this rig for any sword geometry coming out of any sheath, any size as well. All right, so it's kind of a cool little method. I'll show you, I'll talk about how we're going through it the whole time, but as it is tradition to look at the blue screen that has the question on it, let's take a look one more time at the Ask Video Mail question for this week. Okay, so like I said before, how would you animate a sword coming out of its sheath? Well, I've set up some proxy geometry here, and this is basically the hierarchy for our sword rig, and I've set up some controllers. So let me just quickly talk about what's going on here. One of the issues with having a sword coming out of a sheath is that it needs to stay in line with the sheath. It can't bend or turn or twist as it's coming out, otherwise the sword geometry will penetrate the sheath geometry. Okay, so actually let me hide the NURBS curves and you can see. Here's our sword. It's on X-ray right now, so now you can see. All right, here's our sword, here's our sheath rather, and here's our sword. Okay, so it goes whoop, right in just like that. Okay. So one of the issues, of course, is that the sword can't bend as it's coming out of the sheath. And that would be really hard if you had your hand controller on the sword parented to your hand and you were trying to draw the sword out using the hand, because the hand is going to be tilting and twisting and it's just going to be a mess. Okay? So rather than do that, what I've done is I've created this little controller right here. All right. In fact, I'm going to lock the X and Z, and the scale is fine. You can do that. I'm just going to lock and hide these. And I'm just going to hide this scale. Okay. So now all you have is translate Y. Now you can you can zero this if you like, but when you scale your rig, there's going to be an arbitrary value on one end of the sheath, and this is what I mean by that. Right now my translate Y is like 15.692, and it goes on forever, I'm sure. All right. If I zeroed it right now, then I animated the sword back into the sheath by dragging this down right here. All right. There's no guarantee really that if the sword geometry that you're going to use, it's actually going to go down to 0. For me, I zeroed it down here, right? I zeroed it at the bottom of the sheath, but what if you have a sheath that's a little bit shorter? All right, so you're going to have, then the value up here is going to be different than my value up there. So there's really no way to get it so that it's at a really nice, predictable value at the top and bottom, no matter what. And so I kind of think that rather than setting up an expression or a driven key or anything like that, it doesn't really matter because you're going to eyeball the sword right when the tip is going into the sheath anyway. All right, so there's only one frame, maybe 2 frames where you'd have to kind of like finagle it just a little bit. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So it doesn't matter that this is not zeroed right now, the slider for the sword in the sheath. And I just locked every channel except the Y, so it can only go in and out. Okay. Now, this controller is a child of the sword, the sheath controller. All right, so as you can see, no matter how the sheath controller is pointed, this control can only move up and down in the sheath. And that was one of the things that was pointed out in the forums, which is good. You definitely need this control to ride along with the sheath controller. And this sheath controller is what you would constrain to your character's like hip. If they're walking, you know, there it is going, and if they turn around, whatever, okay? Now this can be zeroed, and I do recommend that you zero it, okay? Okay, so, and then finally, when the sword is out of the sheath, you need a controller. So I like this little, you know, 6-direction controller, you know, to represent that. And you most likely want to parent constrain your hand to the sword itself. Okay, so get your hand onto the handle and then constrain the hand to the handle. So the handle is the master, is the parent of the hand for this. So now we got to just set up, and I've gone through this before when we correctly, quote unquote, rigged a prop, which is that all of your geometry should be in a group so you can swap it out. So let's set that up real quick. Okay, first thing is the sheath is going to be controlled by this sheath control. So I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to control select the sheath geo group in the outliner over here and go constrain. And I need to make sure that it picks up both translation, rotation, and scale. So I'm just going to double check, make sure that maintain offset and all axes are constrained in my parent constraint options. And I'm going to apply and close. And then in scale, same thing, maintain offset and all axes are constrained. I'm going to hit add. So now you see over in the channel box, all transform channels are constrained. All right. And now when I move this around, it works perfectly. Now, again, remember why we want to have a group. All right, we always want to constrain to groups, and the geo rides around. Consider the group like a container, and you can add or subtract any geometry you want from the container. Let's add just a little. You'll notice that the bottom of the sheath is open. We don't want that, so let's add just like a little nib. A little round nib to the bottom of the sheath, like this. And let's scale it down, and let's flatten it a little bit, and let's make it like cover just the end of the sheath right here, just like that. All right, now I'm just going to, you can either middle mouse drag and drop it into the group by letting go like this, or you can just select the group, or select the object, select the group, and hit P, and then it parents it, okay? And look, I like to keep things very nicely named, so I'm going to call this sheath nib geo, okay? And now, as you can see, when I move around the sheath, any geometry, including the nib that I just added, rides around inside, okay? Next thing we need to make sure is that the sword is being controlled by this handle control. So same thing, I'm going to select the handle control, select the sword geo group, and then since I tore off this box right here, I don't have to go up to constrain again because it's right here, and it's really quick. I just go parent, scale, and we're done, right? It's looking good. We just wiggle this around, okay? Now the next thing we need to make sure is that the slider, when it moves up and down, controls the sword. Okay? Now that's all well and good, but we don't want it to control the sword all the time. For instance, if he takes the sword out and then turns around like this, but he wants to continue pointing the sword at somebody. So let's say he takes it out and he turns like this. We don't want the rotation on the sheath to be affecting the sword, right? So we have to animate that constraint, don't we? And there's a way you can set this up automatically, but it involves expressions, and I don't want to get that complex with people. So I just want to show you how to do it right when you're doing it, when you're animating it yourself, and then it should be pretty self-explanatory. So what we need is we need a group over this sword handle control. And as you can see, I've already set that up. It's this group right here, hand control offset. So when I created this group, or sorry, when I created this control, I just hit Control G on it and rename this offset. So it's like a container again. And we want the handle to be free to move around within the container, right? Okay. So this is all we do. We just grab the slider, the sheath slider control, which is going to move the sword in and out of the sheath, and then control select the hand control offset, and then do parent, scale, we're done. So now when the slider goes up and down, wherever the sheath is, you notice how I don't even have to change it to object axis to do this. I can even do it in world axis because those other axes are locked, right? It slides in and out of the sheath. Okay. So now we have everything set up so that the sword can go in and out of the sheath. That's great. But now we want to define this position where the tip is just out of the sheath. We want to define that basically as the position where the sword is free to move, right? So the way we do that is we're going to select the handle and we're going to add an attribute. So you go over here, you go Edit, Add Attribute, and we're going to call this in sheath like that. The minimum is going to be 0. The maximum is going to be 1. Make sure the data type is float, so it can be any value between 0 and 1. And the default is going to be 1. All right, so the default is going to be yes, right around in sheath. All right, so we hit OK, and then here's our value. This is very simple from here on out. All we do is connect this to the parent constraint that we just set up between the sheath slider and the handle control. So you go General Editors, Connection Editor, okay? And now we want to select, go all the way to the bottom. It auto loads on the left the current object you have selected. So we select in sheath. That's what we want to control this attribute. And then if we click on the control and hit up, then the hand control offset group is selected that has this constraint. All right, and all you have to do is you have to select the constraint itself. So the easiest way I found is just to go into the attribute editor and select the constraint tab and then hit select. And then hit reload right in the connection editor, and you'll see at the bottom that this sheath slider world object, that is the weight that we want to, actually it's not sheath slider world object, sorry, it's sheath slider weight 0. But that was what we want to connect. So in sheath, that channel we created controls the weight of the sheath slider, okay? Meaning, right now, in sheath is 1, and the control moves it up and down, okay? If we change in sheath to 0, the slider doesn't move it in and out of the sheath, okay? Very simple. And this thing can be moved around and whatever, right? Now you'll notice if I move it around like this and then turn on in sheath, it doesn't correct the values, and I can move it in and out like this. So that's why we zeroed the sword handle control. So now if I go to translate and rotate 0, lo and behold, it goes right back into the position that it needs to when it needs to be sheathed. All right. So the question was, let's just do the question. The question was, how would you animate a sword in and out of a sheath? And so here we go. Let me show you. All right. Let's just pretend the sheath is moving. Let's do this over like 48 frames. The sheath is moving like kind of all over the place in this time. Okay. All right. So basically, I would select this, hit set key, and set key, and let's say it takes 10 frames to get out. I would set another key on frame 10, slide it up, slide it all the way out. Then set key on frame 11, turn off in sheath, and then you can just match this to the frame before. It's not that difficult. Flip this around, it's doing its crazy thing, whatever, and then let's say on frame 35, it's going to come back. Come back to position. And then if you do it over a few frames, and then 0 it, and then key this again, and then slide it back in. Okay, now let's make sure, just real quick, that these keys are flat, and they are. Okay, so now we have the sword coming out, flipping around, and going back in. Okay. I'm just going to delete these keys, and I'm going to create a little bit of a cheat, a little bit of a guide as to where the sword is kind of at 0. Okay, so I'm just going to make a new control. Okay, and this is going to be, let's use this one. Okay, it's going to be just, it's going to be parented underneath the same group as the slider is. And why I'm doing that is so that you can always have, I'm going to call this guide control, always have a guide as to where the sword needs to be. So for instance, you can go like this. You can let's make sure this is zeroed, modify freeze. Okay. Okay, so let's say you have the sword and it's not in sheath, so it's way over here. You can do some cool things. You can, for instance, point and orient. Oops, orient should not have maintained. There we go. Point and orient, constrain it, and then it snaps back to where it's supposed to be. And then you can delete those two constraints, and then voila, you've animated the handle control back to where it needs to be. Okay. Or you can use the Maya align tools. The align tools are finicky sometimes. I'm going to let you experiment with those, but now at least we have a guide. As you know, if we're flipping this around and the sheath is over here or whatever, and we want to just no hassle, because you saw me try to line it up and it was a little bit of a hassle. Now we can just grab this and then go point, orient, and then delete those two constraints, and the handle is right back where it's supposed to be. So let's I'm just going to save this rig out, and if you have any geometry that you want to put into this rig, so if you have a sword that's way bigger than this, first thing you do is just scale this rig to your geometry, okay? Just scale it to your geometry, and you can decide on the position of this slider as well, okay? And then you might want to reposition the little guide to be where the handle is, the handle control on your geometry. And then the last thing you do is just take your geometry and drop it into either the sheath geogroup or the sword geogroup, and anything that's in those geogroups will be moved around by either the sheath or the handle, and then you're all set. Okay, so no big deal. All right, this was a lot of fun. I will give you this rig so you can play around with it. Thank you for coming and checking it out. There is hopefully a few people watching right now that came over from the 11 Second Club forums and are using the promo code to check out the site. I hope you stay. If you don't want to pay any money, then the best way to do that is to just refer new members. There is always referral bonuses going on. You get 30 days free if you refer a member that signs up for the 1 month or 6 month subscription, and you get 60 days free if you refer a member who signs up for a year. Also, right now there's a referral contest going on. There's still a very low number to beat if you want to win a free copy of How to Cheat in Maya 2012, my new book, co-wrote with Eric Luta. It is on bookshelves now, but if you don't have it, if you refer the most members before CTN, which is November 18th, it's coming right around the corner, you will win a free copy of the book. I'll even pay for shipping. I'll ship it right to your front door. All right? So think about it. Thank you for checking out the site. Please send more Ask Videomail questions to webmaster@kennyroy.com. I will promise to read all the questions I get and answer the ones I hope will help the most people. So good luck with your animation, and as always, rock on.